Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over a chilly and active pattern which is going to be taking place over the northern half of the country. This will be different from what we've been recently experiencing, where it's been fairly consistently cold and chilly in the east. Right now it's going to be going to a bit of a more up and down pattern. We're going to be going through warm and cold spells over the next couple of weeks. So that's what we're going to be discussing in today's video. Again, we're going to just be giving you a general update on the pattern. For those of you wondering about any snowstorms which may be upcoming, I will probably be covering them within the next few days. I just want to get closer to those events before I make a video on it so that it can be a little bit more accurate and so that we'll have a little bit more information on those storms. So here's a look at our weather photo of the day. This one was sent in by Peter from Marquette, Michigan, and he actually sent in three pictures which we're going to go through. This area got around 2 to 5 inches of snowfall before about Sunday morning. So this is when those photos were taken, all around Sunday morning. And again, the general reports from that area were about 2 to 5 inches, with some areas away from Marquette further to the east and to the west, getting closer to 6, 7, or even 8 or more inches of snowfall. So here's the first one. Again, you can see just kind of a backyard shot showing some of the snowfall which was accumulating, and it stuck pretty well. There was also, of course, wind with this, so I'm pretty sure it was a northwesterly or a northerly wind, so the trees facing that side had snow cover on them, and then of course the other side of the tree, no snow cover on it. So that is one effect that you do see, and sometimes you'll even see kind of little patches in the grass where maybe a building was or a tree was, where it's kind of just blocking all that snow from accumulating. So you do see that there, and that would indicate that there were probably some fairly decent winds associated with this system. Here's the next picture, and this one's just kind of showing a forest. While I believe it's actually snowing in this picture, I might be mistaken, but it does look like there's at least some snow falling at this time. There's some snow accumulating already on parts of the branches, and it is decently deep. I would say closer to 3 to 5 inches of snowfall, just based on looking at some of these pictures. And then my favorite personally is this one. This is the last photo that he sent in, and you can see a long unpaved road right here. It has a little gap in the middle of the forest, and then of course you see that hill in the background. So a really great shot there from Peter. So if you guys have any photos like this that you want to send in, send them over to my email address, which is elitheweatherguyyt@gmail.com, and I will be featuring your photos. I am going to be having to delay some of the featuring of some of these photos just because we already have a few more in hand. So especially on Saturday and Sunday, we got a few people sending in weather photos, so I'm spreading it out every single day of this week. We're gonna have another weather photo sent in, and especially if you have anything with snow or anything related to that you want to send in, send them over, and I'll definitely feature them. Just write a general area from where you took it, that photo from. So it could just be a city name, it could be a general region. So if you didn't want to specify Marquette, Michigan, you could have just said the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It doesn't really have to be anything specific. And also, just one thing that I would prefer is if it was a horizontal picture, because that would fit on the screen a little bit better. So here's a look at the National Weather Service page. You can see that we do have a few high wind warnings and watches up for parts of Montana, as well as for some parts of Virginia, West Virginia, and Maryland. We have some flood watches up into northwestern Washington, as well as some winter weather advisories in parts of western New York. Other than that, we don't have many other watches or warnings currently in place. Yesterday we had a high temperature of 89 degrees in Woodland Hills, California, Chino, California, and 2 miles west of Paula, California, all of them getting up to 89 degrees Fahrenheit. The low temperature was 23 miles northwest of Clayton Lake, Maine, where they got down to about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's right up near the Canadian border in northwestern Maine. And then also Averill, Vermont, where they got down to 2 degrees as well, and that's in northeastern Vermont, right up near the Canadian border. We also had a highest rainfall report of 3.51 inches near Mount Baker, Washington. It was a little bit lower down in the elevation, so it was probably a mix of both rain and snow, but the melted liquid precipitation was 3.51 inches reported. And then the high snowfall report was 16.8 inches 2 miles northwest of Cattaraugus, New York, and that's in the southwestern part of the state. It is a hilly part of New York, so right off the Great Lakes you get the lake effect, and then a lot of that can actually be enhanced because this area is over a slightly higher elevation, so you do get some decent lake effect effects over that region. Now let's start talking about the pattern which is going to be taking place over the next couple of weeks. So here's the PNA, the Pacific North America Index, and this one is going to stay in that negative column, which is usually not so good of a sign if you're a cold and snow lover in the east, and if you want to see cold and snow conditions in the eastern United States. Usually this would indicate actually a colder western United States, and then that's really all it would signify, but usually when it's colder in the west, it is warmer in the east. So normally a negative PNA is associated with a warmer pattern in the east. And of course, that does look like some of that will be true, although there will be one exception. I think for some parts of the Midwest, Great Lakes, and Northeast, especially as you get further to the north, you will be stuck in a bit of a loop of storms, which is going to be traveling from central Canada and down on into the United States, and that area could avoid some of the milder temperatures that would be moving in by this time of December. So at least early and mid-December, looking a bit more on the milder side of things. Now the NAO, this one is going to be a little bit more promising if you like cold and snow. Now being above the line usually is a negative sign, so usually you want this to be in a negative position if you like cold and snow in the east. Although even if it's just hovering right around that 0 mark, it's really not going to have too big of an impact on the pattern, and it is looking like it's fluctuating back and forth between right around 0 and maybe -1 on this chart right here. So the NAO looks to be in decent shape, but it's not ideally where you would want it to be. You would want this to be closer to 2 or 3 below that 0 line. And then taking a look at the Arctic oscillation, the AO, this one's also going to be taking a nosedive towards the end of the track. So we could be seeing this go back into the negative phase, which, as long as it's closer to the middle line, that is decent for the eastern United States. You can see some storms being signaled here. So we do have one storm likely right around the 1st or 2nd. We have another one probably around the 4th or 5th, 7th or 8th. We also have one more, and then some sort of storm past about the 13th, and then probably one more around the 14th or the 15th. So there's a bunch of tinier storms that you can actually see being depicted from this model right here, and that's something that is interesting with these oscillations. It not only tells us what the possible temperature pattern could be, but also what the possible activity of these storms could be like. It doesn't really tell us the location of the systems, but we can of course use the surface parameters to actually figure that part out. So here's a North American view of the upper air map, and this is showing you pretty much all of North America. Now, we do see that much of Canada, all the way up to the Arctic Circle, including Alaska, is in a fairly active state. So we're seeing many storms rolling through. And in fact, for tomorrow afternoon, you can already count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can even count this as 6, 7 storms in this entire area. So that's including the smaller storms. You could even count this as 8. That would be a small clipper storm. But there are, just to give you just a general idea, there are a lot of storms up in Canada right now. But then you look at the United States and you really don't see a lot. You see a little cold front back through the central United States, but much of the west is actually in a ridging and warm pattern, which typically indicates also a drier pattern. So with all that activity into Canada, you can see a little bit of a slant, and then as it gets towards the northeast, some of that is actually spilling down into New England and the Great Lakes as well. So those are the only areas. I think this area right here is where you could still be under some of the effects of some colder air, even though much of the rest of the country might be on the warmer side. So here would be for Thursday. Again, a ton of storms rolling around. So just to do a quick count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This would be 6 right there. 7 storms up into Canada or Greenland or Alaska. So over that area, relatively small when you're talking about all these storms being clamped into one area like this. So we are talking about a fairly claustrophobic pattern up into Canada, where you have a ton of storms rolling around, and they really don't have a lot of room because you have all of this high pressure, which is right around this dome of low pressure. So you have one big area of low pressure up into Canada, and then you have all of these high pressure systems which are out into the Atlantic, out in the Pacific, one down in the United States, and there would even be one up in Asia and Europe. So that's kind of locking in all the low pressure systems up in Canada, and there's only very limited areas where this is spilling through. So again, the jet stream by this point is looking somewhat like this. So again, the Northeast getting in on some cold air, the rest of the country dealing with warmer rising air for that area. It would also be a quiet pattern for these areas, at least up until this point. But it does start to get a little bit more active. So right around Friday, we have a little storm moving across central Canada. We have another one in the northeast and a couple more that are starting to reload up into Alaska and British Columbia. Now moving this on, again, Saturday looks fairly mild for much of the country, and then we get more storms to roll in by Sunday. Here's for Monday. It looks like it could get a little bit colder by early next week before eventually we see this warming down a little bit as we get to right around the 10th or 11th. It looks like it could warm up once again. This is not going to be a sustained pattern, so we're not going to see anything that's going to stick for a while. So even if you do get a cold shot, only expect that to last for maybe 2 or 3 days, and same with the warm air, although I think that could last a little bit longer. So maybe we're talking about 3 or 4 or 5 days, but I really don't think anything is going to sustain more than 6 or 7 days at a time, especially if you live in the east. It might be a little bit different in the west, where things could definitely be a little bit more on the calm side, and you really don't have this pressure coming in from Canada, where in the east you have all these storms trying to dive in further to the south, and that's mainly because we have our weather systems moving from west to east. So these storms are trying to move in. They come in from the Pacific, and they really don't have much tension up into this area, but once they move into the central part of Canada, there's a ton of storms kind of crowded in this place. They want to move down into the United States, or they want to move out into the Atlantic, and they're really just trying to find an escape route. So much of the west is actually going to be calmer with probably relatively lower amounts of storms, although the only exception would be the northwest, mainly Washington and British Columbia. Those areas definitely will see more of a stream of moisture, but in terms of stormy activity, really, or bigger storms, that's all going to be in the east because of that buildup of tension right around the Canadian border with the United States. These storms are really trying to spill in across the border and kind of move into the United States. And once you get a couple storms in a row to kind of just feed into the United States, and once you get a little cycle going, you can really start to see all this low pressure move further to the east. So this isn't really too bad of a pattern, especially considering that we know this is not going to last for too long, where we have all this warm air pent up, because if you have all that cold air up in Canada, that's not going to be able to stay there forever. So it's eventually going to have to spill either into Europe or Asia, or into North America and primarily the United States. So if you're looking at this, that would line up fairly good for the holiday season, where right around Christmas time, you might be getting a bit of a reversion into some more cold air. So even though right around the 10th, it might start to be a little bit on the warmer side. Here's an example of that. This is the 9th of December. Again, whatever happens on the 9th of December not necessarily is going to be what happens on the 20th or the 21st or the 25th or whatever day in late December or even January by that point. So again, I don't think this pattern is going to last too long. It's a little bit too all over the place to really be sustained at all. But again, it is mainly because of how many little storms are rolling around Canada. You can see all of this green and purple splattered across the screen. We have one storm here, so that would be the first storm. Second storm, we have another storm out near Nova Scotia. 4, 5 up here, 6, 7, 8 right over here. So we have a ton of storms moving across this area. If we were to extend that over the entire northern hemisphere, I'm sure you could find more up into the European side of the northern Atlantic. So really, there are a ton of storms moving around, and eventually this tension between the high pressure to the south and the low pressure to the north will break, and it's going to break in favor of the cold air, because that's typically how these things end up working. So once you get into that cycle where you have more storms a little bit further to the south, you could definitely see this setting up for a colder late December and January. So overall, it's going to be an interesting pattern. It will mean a lot more storms moving across this northern part of the country. So if you want more snow, and especially if you live in areas like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, these areas a little bit further to the north into parts of New England and the Great Lakes, it looks like you could be in the path of a few storms. Whether you'll be on the rain side or the snow side, still uncertain, but it does look like at least we're going to see a few more of these clipper storms move in from central Canada and dive their way further to the south. That is going to wrap it up for today's video. So if you did enjoy it, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. Also, make sure that you have your notifications turned on, because sometimes YouTube doesn't give you the notifications unless you click the little bell. And I do upload daily, so you'll be getting the notifications for when I upload. Usually it's in the afternoon, and on the weekends it is usually in the later morning. So again, that is going to wrap it up for today's video, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.